Illinois women helped advance women's rights in this state much earlier than those in other states across the country. In 1891, the state of Illinois granted women the right to vote in school board elections. In 1913, the landmark Illinois Municipal Voting Act gave women the right to vote for President of the United States and local offices. Illinois was also one of the first states to ratify the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which in theory gave women the right to vote nationwide. One of the strongest women's rights activists of the day was Florence Risser Funk. She was born in Bloomington in 1871 to Abram and Mary Risser. Her father was a German immigrant who owned and operated a successful saddlery business. The family moved to Chicago to expand opportunities for the business when Florence was about 5 years old. As a young woman, Funk participated in Chicago society, and she attended Vassar College from 1890 to 1893, earning a special certificate in art. She was in rare company. In 1890, just over 2,800 women earned bachelor's degrees or professional certificates nationwide. In 1895, Florence married Frank Hamilton Funk, son of a former Bloomington mayor. Frank, a Republican, was active in politics and held several offices, including U.S. Representative for Illinois from 1920 to 1927. The couple had 3 children. When living with her husband in Washington, D.C., Florence participated in the American Association of University Women, the Political Studies Club, and a club for spouses of representatives. In Bloomington, Funk was active in a variety of clubs and organizations, including the History and Art Club, the Amateur Musical Club, the YWCA, and the Women's Club. Like many society women during World War I, Funk did her part as a member of the Executive Committee of the Women's Committee of the Council of Defense for the state of Illinois. Members of the committee helped register women for war service, raised money to assist with relief efforts in Europe, and helped conserve food on the home front. Now, Florence Risser Funk will tell us about her first and foremost passion, women's suffrage.
As you might guess from my attire, I am here to encourage you to vote in the upcoming election. As a girl growing up, little did I know that I would play a part in securing women's right to vote in our great country. Oh, I know I am one of the lucky ones, with a happy childhood, a good family, and an obligation to give back to my community. But how could I ever guess that I would witness Illinois' ratification to the 19th Amendment of the Constitution? Maybe I should back up a bit. I am a direct descendant of William Bradford, the first governor of Massachusetts. My father was a Union officer in the Civil War, and my grandfather an early settler here in McLean County. I was born in Bloomington and met my husband when we were children, but then my family moved to Chicago and I grew up there. I studied in the School of Art and Music at Vassar, and then I came back to Bloomington and I married. My husband, Frank, became a congressman. His father was a congressman and a mayor of Bloomington. So yes, in hindsight, I suppose politics was my destiny. It may surprise you to know that we women in Illinois had the right to vote even before the 19th Amendment. We could vote for school board members and university trustees as early as 1891. Sometimes we could run for certain offices before we could vote for them. We had to have separate ballots and separate ballot boxes from the men. But we wanted our voices to be heard. So we kept pushing our cause, and in June 1913, the bill passed, giving women in Illinois the right to vote for more local offices such as mayor and for president. So I jumped on a presidential campaign trail as soon as I could. Speaking of hindsight, I should say that our state's colored women were working very hard for the vote at the same time. Mrs. Ida B. Wells Barnett of Chicago was also a suffragist. And while perhaps we didn't see eye to eye on everything, I could understand that since white and colored men already had the legal right to vote, white and colored women should have it too. Mrs. Wells Barnett certainly shocked my fellow suffragist Mrs. Wilbur Trout when she joined white Chicago suffragists in a parade in Washington, D.C. She'd been asked to go to the back of the parade so as not to offend Southern suffragists. But she did not. She was a brave and committed woman. As I look back, I can see now that Ida B. Wells Barnett was as active in colored women's clubs as I was in white women's clubs. I see now how our lives ran alongside each other. I guess hindsight is 20/20. White women's suffrage had been entwined with the temperance movement since my mother was a young woman. The temperance movement wanted to limit men's drinking, which interfered with decency and public safety. If women could vote for liquor licenses and saloon hours, then the Women's Christian Temperance Union wanted women to have the vote. Mrs. Ida B. Wells Barnett and Mrs. Frances Willard of the Temperance Union didn't quite agree on this issue. Mrs. Wells Barnett wanted the vote and an end to lynching. Mrs. Willard wanted the vote and an end to drinking. So we pressed on with all the support we could get. I worked on the presidential campaign of Charles Evans Hughes, encouraging women in Illinois to use their new power to vote for president in the November 1916 election. Hughes was the Republican candidate and fully supported women's right to vote and the federal suffrage amendment. Sitting President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, did not. In fact, Hughes wanted the issue of women's right to vote to be settled promptly, the amendment submitted to the people and ratified, and the subject removed from political discussion forever. In campaigning for Hughes, I reminded women that 50,000 Women Club members had been instrumental in bringing about the Illinois suffrage law, that it took no longer for a woman to register and to vote than it did to buy a loaf of bread, that it was their duty to register and vote in the interest of the Republican Party. Earlier, I had been a progressive, supporting the political party started by Teddy Roosevelt so he could run for president again. They called us the Bull Moose Party because Teddy Roosevelt felt as strong as a bull moose. At that time, the Republican Party was just too conservative. But now, progressive Republicans were at the helm. Hughes was both progressive and highly qualified. He had served as governor of New York. He worked hard on behalf of the people, especially workers, writing most of the city's labor laws. He understood New York to be the gateway to the United States and wrote laws to benefit immigrants. A businessman and dignified judge, he was not the kind of candidate who could pat every man and woman on the back and ask them to vote for him, like Teddy Roosevelt, the bull moose. I had seen audiences shout for Roosevelt an hour at a time. I had shouted for him myself. But now, the energetic campaigning was up to us. We wanted every man in the state to encourage every woman in the state to vote. We had 1 million women available to vote for Hughes. We thought surely we would win against Woodrow Wilson, whose only campaign was that he had kept us out of the war. Well, ultimately, he did not keep us out of the war. Sadly, Wilson won re-election by a narrow margin and almost immediately got us into the war. So I put my other work aside to help with war relief. My women's club members raised funds to send 2 young women to France to do canteen work. They served cookies, coffee, donuts, and sandwiches to tired, hungry soldiers. Here at home, we helped with the war gardens, planting enough food to feed ourselves here locally, so we had enough food to send to soldiers and starving civilians in Europe. That was good work to do. But now, here I am again, encouraging you to vote in the upcoming election. I was so lucky to be there in Springfield on June 10th, 1919, when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was read aloud in the General Assembly, giving women all across the country the right to vote. We Illinois suffragists sitting in the gallery applauded with all of our hearts. This achievement, urged by Susan B. Anthony so many years earlier, one she did not live to see, we in Illinois had helped bring into being. So if you are a woman and a citizen and old enough to vote, it is your privilege, your right, and your duty to do so. Let it be an honor to vote, as it was to fight for suffrage. Please, vote. I thank you.
After the 19th Amendment was ratified, Funk returned to Bloomington and began speaking to women's groups about their new responsibility, now that they had achieved the right to vote. Unfortunately, Funk's opportunity to enjoy the nationally won franchise for women lasted only 3 years. Florence Funk died on September 6, 1923, having been in declining health for several months. But she did live to see the first woman elected to serve in the Illinois House of Representatives, Lottie Holman O'Neill from Downers Grove, who was elected in 1922.